Okay, this week we saw the classic problem you get when you double book fights. What does that mean? Well, let me break it down in this video, but in case you've never been to this channel, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, and leave a comment. Let me know if you like my opinions. I am sitting in a sweaty podcast studio to record content for y'all. And if you listen on the newsletter, you can also go to my YouTube and get some great content as well. So what do I mean by double booking a fight? The assumption this week was Caleb Plant would beat Armando Resendiz and Jermall Charlo would beat Thomas Lamanna. Those victories would then propel a fall or late 2025 matchup at some point between the two. What ended up happening was Jermall Charlo was able to beat Thomas Lamanna, but he also showed some vulnerabilities, in my opinion. The hand speed isn't quite the same. He still has a good jab. His legs aren't really there. I don't remember, because he doesn't fight all that often, if the legs were ever fully there, but I remember being incredibly impressed with his versatile performance against Sergey Derevyanchenko. Against Thomas Lamanna, he had some skill advantages over Lamanna, and he had a power advantage, and he was able to take over with his power. But I also saw a fighter that looked every bit of his age and looked like inactivity had plagued him, but he was able to get the job done. Now, here is inherently the problem. At least Jermall Charlo entered the fight with something to prove. He's coming off of inactivity, and people were doubting him. One issue with double booking fights, Armando Resendiz was entering the Caleb Plant fight with all the motivation in the world. People had highly doubted what he was capable of. He had beaten Jarrett Hurd, but he had lost to an up-and-comer in Elijah Garcia. Marcos Hernandez, a very good fighter, had beaten him. It felt like he was never going to make the leap against a real top-tier elite talent, because Hurd, at the point when Resendiz beat Hurd, he never really won a meaningful and consequential fight after that point. So one could say that Hurd had maybe also fallen off a step and was that tier below the top fighters. Caleb Plant is deemed a superstar fighter, and rightfully so. He gave Canelo Alvarez a tough fight at one point. Comes back, knocks out Anthony Durrell. Has a really entertaining fight with Trevor McCumbee. Back and forth, firefight. Goes down in the fight, comes back to stop him. But people remember, this is something of consequence to, along with what I'm talking about, is Caleb Plant had 3 really damaging fights back to back to back now. It's David Benavidez, where he took a lot of punishment in that fight, and one could even say maybe the coach should have thrown the towel in, but at the same point, it was a competitive fight, and there was always the chance he'd come back, but you risk damage ensuing later in the career. The McCumbee fight, a lot of damage in that fight, and now in the Resendiz fight, he took a lot of body punches, took a lot of clean punches at moments in this fight. Add that with the Canelo fight. That's 4 fights where he's taking a lot of damaging shots. It doesn't change the fact that he's an outstanding fighter and he's one of the best of his era, but damage has an irreversible effect, and there's limitations when you hit your 30s and you have a lot of hard fights. Things will not be the same. And a lot of what Caleb Plant's amazing at is his God-given hand-eye coordination, speed, reflexes, timing. He's able to do things based on reflexes simply other people can't do. It's flashy, it's appealing, it's how he built his fan base, along with the way he carries himself and his deep connection to fashion, hip-hop, and many other things merging all together that has made him a compelling figure in boxing, and one of the more popular figures, especially coming out of a Canelo Alvarez fight. I think he got more and more respect from the fans, because at one time people questioned just how good he was leading into fights with guys like, say, Jose Uzcategui. The other thing is, when you go into this fight and you're coming off a fight with Trevor McCumbee, a guy up-and-comer, but a guy who was talking trash and motivating him, Resendiz was never going to play trash talk games with Caleb Plant, and I think that motivates Caleb. He likes a little back and forth. You always see him being a little confrontational at the press conference. The fact that Resendiz didn't play into that is inherently, I think, going to be a tough deal for Plant, because I think he wants that confrontation. He wants to get up for the fight. He wants to feel like he's going to fight someone that doesn't like him. It felt as though Resendiz was fine not engaging him, just kind of no-selling him. And Resendiz all week looked like he was in a fantastic shape, which made me wonder, was he better suited for super middleweight all along, and had he been fighting at middleweight to kind of shrink down to an optimum weight where he felt like he could use size to his advantage, but maybe he can handle himself better at super middleweight. And then one has to also question, when you're teased the Charlo fight coming up after this, where are your motivations at? I think is an interesting spiritual question to ask, is how motivated can you be for an opponent that simply on paper isn't that motivating to the fans? The assumption was Caleb Plant was going to either outbox or stop Resendiz. And Caleb's not dumb, so he's probably looking at the fight and assessing the fight the same way the fans are assessing it, and ended up, like Chris Algieri once said in the Teofimo Lopez-George Kambosos fight, living a nightmare. Everything went wrong. Now, there are some things that have been like red flags in Caleb Plant's career. One is a reliance on reflexes over maybe some traditional moves at time, like flashy moves, and maybe moving a bit too much in the early rounds could have cost him. It really felt like Resendiz, when he got into a groove in rounds 4 or 5, he just took over the fight. He was able to body punch and slow down the output of Caleb Plant, and then there really wasn't a path to victory, it felt like, for me, once he was able to do that. That being said, it's hard for me to also not look at this fight and wonder, was Caleb not motivated? Like, without making excuses, but he almost looked as though he was a fighter who was going through the motions against someone that was there to win. You know, he was fighting an opponent that was not a spectacular name. It was a guy who came in shape with a good trainer, Manny Robles. By the way, Manny Robles has had a run of great fights recently. Off the top of my head, Sarai Boachuk, Virgil Ortiz, close fight. Terrell Goucher gave Elijah Garcia a hell of a fight. And now Resendiz just beat Caleb Plant. That trainer is on a run, possibly the trainer of the year if people were really paying attention, but I don't think they are. I think this is what happens when you double book fights, and this is possibly what happens when you look ahead, and this is what, when I go back to the classic trap fight. Caleb Plant got himself caught in a trap fight where he was fighting, I think, a style that I wouldn't say doesn't suit him, because Caleb's capable. And I was thinking about this last night after the fight, and I was possibly going to record this video. I just lacked motivation. Caleb Plant probably beats 98 out of 100 super middleweights. Resendiz probably beats 95 out of 100 super middleweights, right? Caleb Plant probably beats more super middleweights in his prime. Who knows if his prime is still his prime right now? We don't know. But Resendiz's style, and if he's able to do what he likes to do, Caleb Plant inherently likes a lower output and to dictate the distance and control the terms of action. If Resendiz controls pace and controls the volume and the punch output, it's going to be a tough matchup for Caleb, because that's not traditionally where he excels. So I think that it was a weird fight, because stylistically, you could look at it one of two ways, right? You could say either Plant's going to run through this guy because he's more talented and on paper he's more accomplished, or there's a way where this fight could get very tricky based on the stylistic matchups. Who knows? I think it's a career crossroads for Plant. I think it is interesting to see after like some hard fights, now you're seeing him once again, like you're just seeing him kind of take a little bit more damage than I'm comfortable with, right? I think that mentally he's as strong as anyone. I'm wondering if the weight class might play a factor, because it looks like shrinking down at super middleweight might not be the best for him outside looking in. Maybe he's a light heavyweight at this point, but I think it's a career crossroads, because he's starting to take more damage against guys who are not considered top level fighters or perceived as top level fighters going in. And that's starting to make me wonder one of two things. Are his reflexes changing? Is his defense changing? Or are we undervaluing some fighters and they're getting up because they see him as more of a finesse fighter and they think they can have the best fight of their career? Because McCumbee and Resendiz both put on really, really competitive fights with Plant. And I mean, now if the Charlo fight were made, I still favor Plant, but you have to think that this fight now is hurt. Plant is inherently one of my favorite fighters, because he has this badass nature of being the underdog who shut everybody up. And this fight was an odd one, because his demeanor completely changed in points. I'm not sure if he was fighting an injury, if something went wrong in the camp, but something was really off. And I don't know how to assess it, because I'm not around the camp and I don't know everything and we don't pretend to know everything, but I do know that something wasn't the same as it's been. And I'm marking this for historical data and for those that enjoy my program. On the other hand, Resendiz just changed his career. He now has a win over Hurd and Plant. Those are two former title holders. And now he can possibly put himself into a Marcos Maidana-like role in the division, where he can take on good fights as a brawler, a slugger, with up-and-comers, big-name fighters. So really the big winner is Resendiz, who basically not a lot of people gave a chance to. And I think the situation that led to this win was partially Resendiz's preparation, but it was also the underlying tone of Plant versus Charlo in the future, I think allowed the opportunity of the upset also to happen.